Before the start of the 21st century, several names could be debated within the conversation for greatest male tennis player of all time. Rod Laver, Bjorn Borg, and Pete Sampras were a few of these names. But over the past 20 plus years, fans of the sport of tennis have been graced with three absolute icons who have placed themselves light years ahead of any stars of tennis past: Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, and Novak Djokovic. From 2004 to 2023, these three titans won a total of 65 out of 79 major Grand Slam titles. Prior to these three great champions, the most major Grand Slams won by a single player was 14 by Pete Sampras. Fast forward to today, and Roger Federer stands with 20, Rafael Nadal 22, and Novak Djokovic 24, with only Djokovic still actively competing on the tour. These three great rivals have reached incredible heights in the sport of tennis. Their rivalries have transcended the sport and transfixed fans for 2 decades. And while Roger Federer may be the most revered, and Novak Djokovic has proven himself the last man standing with the highest total of major Grand Slams, I'm here to make the argument for why Rafael Nadal is the greatest tennis player of all time. Now, for many people, the GOAT of tennis comes down to one single number: Grand Slam titles. And as previously mentioned, Novak Djokovic owns this record with 24. Let's take a step back and look at the timeline of Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic's entire playing careers. Roger Federer, the oldest, won his first Grand Slam title in 2003 at Wimbledon. He won his final Slam title in 2018 at the Australian Open. Rafael Nadal won his first Slam in 2005 at the French Open. He won his final Grand Slam in 2022, also at the French Open. Novak Djokovic, the youngest, won his first Grand Slam title in 2008 at the Australian Open. He won his final Grand Slam as of now at the US Open in 2023. All three of these icons had insane runs. Roger Federer had 15 years between his first and last Slam, Rafael Nadal had 17 years between his first and last Slam, and Djokovic also has had 15 years between his first and last, though he is still ranked in the top 10 and could still potentially vie for more. But one thing that is extremely interesting to note is the competition that the three of these champions had to face. Roger Federer was absolutely dominant early in his career. When 19-year-old Rafael Nadal won his first Slam, Federer had already racked up 4. And at one point in 2007, Federer held a 12-3 advantage in Grand Slam championships, with Nadal only having won 3 French Open titles on clay. It wasn't until the following year in 2008 that Novak broke through for his first Grand Slam win. And before he would win his second Slam in 2010, Federer had already accumulated 16 of his eventual 20 Grand Slam titles. So it can easily be examined that while Federer enjoyed massive success, the majority of his Grand Slam titles came before Nadal reached his prime and before Djokovic really even broke onto the scene. Now apply this perspective to Novak Djokovic, the youngest of these three champions. In 2018, an aging Federer won his 20th and final Grand Slam at the Australian Open. After that time, Novak Djokovic won 12 Grand Slams, which is half of his record 24. So similar to how Federer enjoyed a lengthy stretch at the beginning of his career with a very young Nadal and no Djokovic at all, Djokovic enjoyed a similar stretch at the end of his career with an aging Nadal and essentially no Federer, who officially retired in 2022. And now, look at the timeline for Rafael Nadal. Nadal's career played out right in the middle of his other two massive rivals. While Federer and Djokovic each racked up Grand Slams during stints of their career that they didn't have to deal with both of the other two members of the Big Three, Rafael Nadal had to battle these two legends in their primes for nearly the entirety of his career. In fact, let's take a look at the most frequent Grand Slam opponents during each of these three's most successful period of Grand Slams. Breaking it down into stretches of 7 years, Roger Federer's most successful period spanned from 2003 to 2009. During which time he won 15 Grand Slams. During this time, here are his 3 most common opponents. Coming in at third was Rafael Nadal, who we know went on to win 22 Grand Slams. The second most common opponent for Federer during this stretch was Lleyton Hewitt, who won 2 Grand Slams. And the most frequent opponent for Federer during this time was Andy Roddick, who won 1 total Grand Slam. That's a total of 25 Grand Slams from Federer's 3 most common opponents during his most successful stretch. The most successful period for Novak Djokovic spanned from 2017 to 2023, during which time he won 12 Grand Slams. Over this period, here are his 3 most common opponents. Once again, coming in at third was Rafael Nadal, who again won 22 slams. Second, Mario Berrettini, who never won a Grand Slam. And the first most common opponent for Djokovic was Daniil Medvedev, who won 1 Grand Slam. That's a total of 23 Grand Slam titles from Djokovic's 3 most common opponents during his most successful stretch. And now, Rafael Nadal. Nadal's most successful period spanned from 2007 to 2013, during which time he won 11 Grand Slams. Over this period, here are Nadal's 3 most common opponents. Coming in third was Andy Murray, who won 3 Grand Slams, who sometimes is even lumped in with these other greats and referred to as the Big Four rather than the Big Three. The second most common opponent for Nadal was Novak Djokovic, who we know won 24 Grand Slams. And unsurprisingly, the first most common opponent for Nadal was Roger Federer, who won 20 Grand Slams. That's a total of 47 Grand Slam titles from Nadal's 3 most common opponents during his most successful stretch. So Roger Federer and Novak Djokovic feasted on the competition whenever the other or Nadal wasn't around. But Rafael Nadal never had that luxury. He had to battle against the 2 other greatest tennis players of all time in order to earn nearly every single one of his 22 Grand Slam titles. It's also interesting to note that Rafael Nadal had to miss a total of 17 Grand Slams in his career due to various injuries. His frequency for injury is, fairly, one of the biggest knocks on Nadal. And out of only 68 total Grand Slams that Nadal played in, he won 22 for a winning percentage of 32.3%. Novak Djokovic thus far has competed in 76 Grand Slams, only missing 3, which is one of his most impressive accomplishments, and he did win 24 of those for a winning percentage of 31.5%. Roger Federer missed 8 Grand Slams, mostly all towards the latter portion of his career, and he won 20 out of 81 that he played in for a winning percentage of 24.6%. Therefore, Nadal had the highest winning percentage at Grand Slams despite going against the other members of the Big Three for nearly his entire career. And even if you took out each player's best event, the Australian Open for Djokovic, Wimbledon for Federer, and of course the French Open for Nadal, Rafael Nadal still has the best winning percentage against the Big Three in any of those other Grand Slam matches. Rafael Nadal has officially received the Wilt Chamberlain treatment. That is, his dominance in certain areas has reached such astronomical heights compared to the rest that people somehow begin to overlook and even discount the incredible achievements. Let's start with the obvious. Rafael Nadal has won 14 French Open titles at Roland Garros. Tennis aficionados have somehow become numb to how mind-boggling this accomplishment truly is. No individual athlete has ever dominated a single championship in such a fashion as this. In fact, this could legitimately be considered the greatest individual accomplishment in the history of any sport. Even Michael Phelps, who has 23 Olympic gold medals to his name, won 10 of those gold medals with relay teams, meaning that only 13 were individual. When trying to come up with any individual athlete in the history of sports who has won more than 14 individual titles at one location, the closest I could come up with was Joey Chestnut, who has won the annual Nathan's Hot Dog Eating Contest 16 times. And when it comes to athletic prowess between Rafael Nadal and Joey Chestnut, I'll let you be the judge. Let me show you some examples of just how insanely dominant Rafael Nadal has been at the French Open. His career record at this event is 112-4, good for a 97.4 winning percentage, the highest ever of any single player in any single event. And here's how 14 French Open titles compare to all of the other tennis greats. With 1 French title championship, Roger Federer. Coming in with 2, Cotis, Courier, and Bruguera. With 3 French Open titles, Wilander, Lendl, Kuerten, and Djokovic. Coming in with 6 French Open titles, you have legend Bjorn Borg. And of course, at the very top, Rafael Nadal with 14. But wait, we're forgetting just a few. Also coming in with 1 French Open title, the same as Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal as a teenager. Coming in with 4 French Open titles, Rafael Nadal without dropping a single set. Coming in with 5 French Open titles, Rafael Nadal in his 30s. That's right, Rafael Nadal won more French Open titles without dropping a single set than Novak Djokovic won in his entire career. And he won more French Opens in his 30s than Djokovic and Federer did in their entire careers combined. So let's now consider this. There are 4 Grand Slam titles in professional tennis which are played on 3 different surfaces. The French Open is played on clay, Wimbledon is played on grass, but for hard courts, you have 2 slams, the US Open and the Australian Open. Nadal's strongest surface was obviously clay. Federer's strongest surface was grass. But Djokovic clearly was best on hard courts, where he had 2 opportunities every year to win a Grand Slam title. Now imagine for a moment if Nadal had 2 clay Grand Slam opportunities every year. It's not totally surprising that Djokovic was able to surpass Federer and Nadal in Grand Slam titles when he had double the opportunities each year to play on his strongest surface. The biggest non-Grand Slam event on clay is probably the Italian Open, which is played in Rome and is one of the 9 Masters 1000 tournaments played each year. Let's pretend for a moment that the Italian Open was considered a Grand Slam in an effort to even up the number of clay slams and hardcourt slams. Djokovic, who won this event 6 times, would then have a total of 30 Grand Slam titles. Nadal, who won the event 10 times, would have a total of 32. Roger Federer never once won this event. Skeptics sometimes downplay Nadal's career by referring to him as a clay court specialist. This, in fact, is absurd. Even if you were to take out Nadal's incredible 14 French Open titles, which as I mentioned are already way too often taken for granted, Nadal still has 8 Grand Slams on other surfaces. 8 Grand Slam titles would still be more than tennis legend John McEnroe won in his entire career, and it's the same number as other tennis legend Andre Agassi. Nadal, despite his intense playing style and frequent injuries, still displayed an astounding level of consistency. He's the only player to be ranked number 1 in 3 different decades. He also holds the record for most consecutive weeks being ranked in the top 10. For 912 straight weeks, spanning 18 different years from 2005 to 2022, Nadal was ranked as one of the 10 greatest tennis players in the world. And not only was his longevity impressive, but his ability to come up big on the largest stage is a true demonstration of his greatness. Nadal is the only male player ever to win a major in 10 consecutive seasons. Nadal also has a winning record against both Djokovic and Federer in Grand Slam tournaments, holding an 11-7 edge over Djokovic and a 10-4 advantage over Federer. When the stage was the biggest and the matches were the longest, with a best-of-5 format that is only played in the Grand Slams, Nadal played his best. And that is a testament to one's true greatness. Only 5 men ever won a Grand Slam title without dropping a single set throughout the entire tournament. Rosewall and Nastase each did it once, Federer did it twice, Bjorn Borg did it 3 times, and Rafael Nadal went an entire Grand Slam tournament without dropping a single set, a record 4 times, including in 3 different decades, with the first instance happening in 2008 and the final taking place 12 years later in 2020. Djokovic never once accomplished the feat. Nadal is also the only person to bagel the number 1 player in the world 3 separate times. A bagel is when a player wins a set 6-0, with the 0 representing the bagel. Nadal has even bageled both Federer and Djokovic in Grand Slam finals, doing so to Federer in the 2008 French Open and serving up a 6-0 win against Djokovic in the 2020 French Open. Djokovic has never once bageled Nadal or Federer in any match. It's easy to look at nothing but the total of Grand Slam titles to make your claim for the greatest. But the truth is, there are so many more layers. The debate for greatest basketball player of all time has raged for decades, but rarely does one point simply to the number of championships or MVPs. You must account for not only championships, but dominance, impact, persistence through adversity, longevity, and the ability to come through on the biggest stages. Many critics use Rafael Nadal's dominance on clay against him when discussing his greatness. But my argument is just the opposite. Nadal's dominance on this one surface was so off the charts that this has forced pundits to downplay its significance just in order to allow others into the conversation. And when you take that amazing dominance in conjunction with his success on other surfaces, his ferocious tenacity, his never-quit style, his years-long staying power, and his success against the other all-time greats, that is why Rafael Nadal is my choice for the greatest tennis player of all time.